Oh, well, thank you. Hi, everyone. How's everyone doing at this moment? You feeling good, excited? Okay, well, settle in. I'm I'm really, really honored to be able to start us off on our next session and introduce a few extremely special folks that are in our Experts on Poverty program. And before they come up here, I want to make reference to the title of this session, which is Poverty, Power, and the People Behind the Numbers. And, you know, I think that matters, especially right now, because often we understand or we see poverty, we understand or we see power, but so few times do we really see the people behind the policy, behind the statistics, behind our leave behind packets. It's really important to humanize this issue because what we're talking about are lives, human lives. And the policies that we're working on the U.S. poverty side, you know, we're talking literally life and death. So this moment really matters, and it's absolutely critical that stories are heard and that the face of poverty is expressed to what it truly is, because those living in poverty are not a monolith. So I'm excited to have our folks up here today. And just a background on our Experts on Poverty program, this is something that we launched in 2015, really in a response to just that. You know, if you look at a picture of a panel on a SNAP hearing, the folks that are on that panel who are deemed as experts, most of the time they have never experienced what it's like to be hungry, what it's like to look at the faces of your children when you can't feed them adequately. So that's why we call our Experts on Poverty experts, because they have expertise. So thank you. And one last thing before we get started. So, you know, this is something that personally had affected me. In 2010 through 2011, I was a recipient of SNAP. And at no moment in my entire life had I ever felt so powerless than when I walked in the grocery store every time and I had to pull out my EBT card and saw the looks of people's faces behind me in the grocery store, looking me up and down. And, you know, I know what they were thinking. And I felt so powerless. And then when I finally found results and walked into my first lobby meeting and I told my senator my story, I have never felt more powerful in my entire life. And I walked out of that room and I said, who's next? Give them to me. So I really appreciate you three being up here willing to share your story. You know, I believe storytelling is sacred. It's also risky and really, really hard. So I appreciate that. But storytelling, you know, that's how we're going to change the world. So with that, I'm going to get us started with our first speaker, who is Kevin Pearson. And Kevin... So Kevin, I had the luxury of trying to find an Uber driver to locate him in the airport. I was like, he's very tall, he's very handsome. Kevin is from Evansville, Indiana. He's attending college, he's got a management position, he's a superstar advocate, a group leader, and gives back to so many folks in need in his own community. And is even a member of the Hunger Free Communities Network Advisory Council, so that's really excited. So Kevin, please come up and share your story if you don't mind.
Thank you very much, Kristy. Hello, everyone. Hi. I am honored to be here today to speak to this great audience about poverty. You know, it's written somewhere in the Holy Bible that the poor will always be among us. And in light of this biblical phrase, I would like to commend everyone here for the positive things that you do to fight poverty in the world. But I used to live in poverty when I was young. It was hard. I was the fifth out of 7 children by a single mother with no high school education. And just that circumstance alone usually meant that you lived in housing projects and you was on public assistance. And that pretty much was the case for my family. And as well as 90% of the homes in the neighborhood where I lived. But I'm 55 years old now, and although my life in poverty ended about 32 years ago, I still have vivid memories of those days. That may be because of the stigma that is usually attached to being poor, the embarrassment. So most of my memories centers around those times when I endured stigma from being poor. For example, at the grade school that I went to and the high school that I attended, I was a star athlete. I was like a celebrity. But I was poor. And usually, most of the times after a basketball practice or a game or a track meet, while all the other white kids were picked up by their parents, I walked home because no one in my family had a car. But usually I would be offered a ride by either a teammate or the coach. They would give me a ride home. And that's when I became a liar. Let me explain. You see, because of the embarrassment that I felt from being poor and living in the housing projects in a rundown neighborhood, I usually had to lie to whoever gave me a ride home. And I did so I would tell them to just drop me off right here, which is about 2 or 3 blocks away from where I lived. Just drop me off right here and I'll be okay, just so they wouldn't see where I lived. And then sometimes I would just have them drop me off in front of somebody else's house that I didn't even know. So here I am, just let me out right here. And as I walked toward the front door, I would look to see if they were driving off. And if they weren't, that's when I would try to go around to the back as if I was going in the back door. But when they eventually did drive off, that's when I would come from behind the house and walk the rest of the way home myself. But I mean, you've heard all the stories about people who were poor, whether it be the welfare that they were on, or food stamps, government cheese, free lunch program, Goodwill clothing. I could go on and on and on. But instead, I would rather just talk about the present, about my life today as I fight poverty and try to help those who are poor. Listen, what the Bible says about the poor always being among us, it doesn't mean that we should just throw our hands up in the air and say, oh, well, can't do anything about it, just prophecy or something like that. What the Bible says about the poor always being among us doesn't mean that we can't fight in spite to eradicate poverty from this planet. To me, that passage means that I got work to do. That's what that means. Listen, I'm just one person, and I can only do so much. But whatever I do, I'm hoping that it will make a difference. And each and every one of you in this audience, you too are just one person. And you can only do so much. But whatever you do wind up doing, it will make a difference. Now, most, if not everyone here, is a results volunteer and an advocate. And we, just like myself, and we do things like meet face-to-face with members of Congress and ask them to protect SNAP and expand the earned income tax credit. But we can do more than that. In my community, as Kristy alluded to, I like to volunteer at soup kitchens and food pantries. And I do this because when I hand someone a plate of food who's sitting there waiting to eat, I like to look them in the eye and give them a smile. And let them know that I care. Thank you. Another favorite place that I like to volunteer is the Boys and Girls Clubs. The little young ones, I like to make an impact on them. And I usually deliver fresh food and snacks to them for them to enjoy. Sometimes I'll spend my money for that, and sometimes I will go out and approach the managers of grocery stores and ask them to donate it. And they usually do it, which is wonderful. That's great. But I do things in the community for the community simply because I want to do more. We all can do more. We all hopefully will do more. So let me finish. Before I start crying, let me finish by repeating something that Tavis Smiley said on this very stage at last year's conference. If you can't remember, he said, "You cannot lead folks if you can't love folks, and you cannot save folks if you can't serve folks. Everyone is equally worthy just because." Thank you, thank you.
See, Kevin, now I have no excuse. Anytime I get up, I'm tired. Kevin says, do more. Okay. Thank you. So I want to stop and say that one of our experts on poverty that was meant to be speaking on this stage this afternoon, Dawn Pierce, couldn't be with us because of a family emergency. So if you just send a quick thought to her and her family, she means a very great deal to all of us, and we do miss her. That being said, and this was a big ask, but our next speaker, Callie Dougherty, bravely stepped up at the last minute to share her story. And Callie is an incredible advocate. She's from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. You heard her speak really powerfully and share another story earlier. She's a former real changer and then became an expert on poverty. And she's also a proud mom of a kid with the best middle name ever, Danger. And she, in addition to her advocacy work here, does incredible work in Milwaukee with an organization called Pathfinders, and that's really about transitioning people in need into stable housing. So an incredible champion there. So Callie, thank you so much. And if you want to share, and I know, Callie, do you want to stay? And the ladies were like, can we just sit in the chair, please? So whatever you want to do, ladies. So, oh, sure. Okay. See, the podium is attractive sometimes when you see other people do it.
So when my son Sebastian turned 3 years old, he was diagnosed with autism. That came after years of knowing that there was something different about him, and no one no doctors that I took him to, no therapist. Nobody could understand what that was. So finally getting that diagnosis was very difficult, but it was also a step in getting things changed around for him. In order for him to receive his therapy services, which are 40 hours a week intensive services, we had to apply for Medicaid. And I am $100 over the limit to reach that myself, so we applied through the Katie Beckett program. And that took us a year of fighting and advocating for him to get these services. In that process, I was very frustrated. I wrote letters to my senator, to state representatives, and let them know if I don't get this, that's $3,000 a month out of my pocket on top of my private insurance for my son to get these needed services, things that they told me could change his life. A local example, which some of you might not be familiar with, there was a young man sleeping in a park in Milwaukee. He was woken up by a police officer and he was shot to death. I went to high school with Dontre Hamilton, and watching that story on the news made me think of my son. If Dontre had received the services that he needed as a child, he wouldn't have been in that situation. And I am not going to let Sebastian or any other child that needs to get these services not receive them, because Medicaid is needed and it is necessary for every person in need.
Callie, thank you. I mean, that's a great example of, taking a policy that's incredibly complicated and nuanced and really just telling the story of what the reality is. So thank you very much for that. Our final amazing expert on poverty is Asia Bijan Thompson. Asia is from Dallas, Pennsylvania, and a recent graduate of Miscordia University, and just got accepted to a few law schools. So and is also an extremely proud mother of 2 beautiful babies. And as Joanne mentioned earlier, she's working really hard on, not only telling her own story, but supporting other people to tell their stories, specifically around Medicaid. So if you have any interest in that, please let her know. She would love to talk to you. And Asia has been with the Experts on Poverty this will be the 2nd year, so we really appreciate you being a part of this and being such a strong advocate. All yours.
Hi. So I'm just going to kind of tell you my story too. So due to being involved in a very abusive relationship from the age of 15, by the age of 18, I had 2 children. Love them. But I learned many things during the labor and delivery with my first child, because I grew up kind of normal as anyone can grow up. And so when I was insured under my mom, because I was a child, but I got pregnant, and then I went to have my child, and I learned that labor is included under that insurance, but delivery is not, and neither is your hospital stay or your baby's hospital stay. So from that moment, leaving the hospital almost $50,000 in debt, I realized that I needed to get insurance. I was a child, and I had a child, so I obviously couldn't get work insurance. So I applied for Medicaid, which really came in handy when my second child came along, and I was 2.5 months preterm, and she had to live in the hospital for a month. And it's a crazy story because I didn't feel like I was in labor, so the hospital didn't have to accept me. And if I didn't have insurance, they wouldn't have, because I wouldn't have been able to pay. But I did have Medicaid, so they accepted me, and it turns out that I was 5 centimeters dilated. So I needed to get steroid shots to develop my daughter's lungs, and I needed to get a lot of other medical things so that to hold her in as long as I could, pretty much. And so she was born able to breathe because of those steroid shots. She's alive today because of Medicaid. And yes, I love her. She's awesome. So, and I feel like it's really important for people to understand how many babies are born early and to people who can't afford the costs of having your child live in the NICU for that long, because it would have been hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so now my children are a little older, and a lot of people assume that since, I'm going to law school and I graduated, that, I would be able to just, buy them insurance. But that's not really a reality for, a full-time student. So both of my children still to this day receive all of their vaccinations. And anytime my son has an asthma attack or my daughter is allergic to something, it's Medicaid that steps in and saves them and helps pay for the medical procedures that they need. And I know I also kind of want to talk about the importance of SNAP too, because being an 18-year-old single mom fleeing a domestic violence situation, I had to move a lot. I couldn't really maintain a job. I ended up in a homeless shelter, and many times when I could get an apartment, I couldn't really afford like the oil heat or the electricity, so we all kind of lived in one room with a heater and on the floor pretty much because I had no furniture. And it was moments like that where I couldn't afford to live, that Medicaid and SNAP really stepped in and saved my children's lives, because when I'm in an apartment where I can't afford heat and my 1-year-old son has an asthma attack, you have to go to the hospital, and you really need insurance to step in and help a lot of hospitals to really accept you and give you a room. So, I can't advocate enough how important these programs are and how important it is for us to strengthen them and protect them. So thank you. Is this on?
It is. Can I borrow that for a second? Well, thank you, each of you, for sharing that. I think it's really important for not only our legislators to hear those stories, but everyone in this room to hear those stories. So it means a lot to us that you share. I thought we might just ask some questions, and then we'll hopefully have some time to take some audience questions. But I think, as I mentioned earlier, sharing your story can be really powerful. That really can be a catalyst for change. That can really bust some dangerous, devastating stereotypes. But on the other end of that, it can be really risky. Sometimes there are serious consequences to sharing your story. So could you tell us a little bit about, how do you find the courage? How do you overcome those risks and those fears in sharing your story? Why is it important to you?
So as Kristy mentioned, I work for a local organization in Wisconsin called Pathfinders, and I work with low-income runaway and homeless youth. And they deal with these sorts of things every day, and they rely on these government programs. So for them and for my son, that is why, even though it's a stigma and it's really hard to share, I always step up and try to advocate for these programs.
I feel like it's just I feel like it's I'm tasked to, because of the I feel like there's so many assumptions made about what people in poverty look like, what people who receive these programs look like. And because of those stigmas, most people don't want to step up and say, hey, I received SNAP, or like, I'm alive because of Medicaid. And I feel like I'm tasked to, because it's so important, because these programs are always at the bottom trying to get ripped out. They're always trying to get ripped out of people's lives. And I feel like my children's lives are obviously in my hands, but I feel like a lot of people who benefit from these programs' lives are in the hands of people who benefit from these programs. So to protect them. So I feel like, I feel tasked to.
I would just like to add that although my testimony today wasn't exactly like Asia and Callie's, whenever I do meet face-to-face with members of Congress, I do tell my story. I do tell them that even as an adult, I hit hard times, and I had to resort to food stamps. And if it wasn't for the food stamps, it just hold me over till I was able to get back going, no telling what I would do, or what would happen. So I'm looking at this person in his face and telling him, no, do not cut anything from the SNAP program. And if you do, you're going to hurt me. I am the person that you don't see when you go into that room and vote to cut this and cut that. I'm the person you don't see. So to be able to talk to him and tell him the reality of the situation is very beneficial. And I think 9 times out of 10, they are persuaded by that live testimony.
I'm thinking of what you said when you shared earlier. You were talking about how meaningful that eye contact is. And that's something that you can't do with, a fact sheet or, statistics. And I think you're right on. And I think that's so important for everyone to sort of keep in your heart. You're walking in these offices, you're making eye contact, and you're telling them why you're there and why you're passionate about that. So thank you for that reminder. In regard to folks that, may not have had that personal experience, can you give the audience some guidance on how they might reach out and in their own communities and become more of a partner rather than exploitative or taking something from them? How can they go back in their communities?
I feel like when it comes to that, I feel like the most fundamental thing to remember is that you're a person and that they're a person, and to approach them as such. And I feel like it's really simple it's like a really simple thought, but from my own experience, when people who probably really do have your best will at heart, and they really do want to help, but if they approach you in a way that makes you feel like they're trying to make you their token poor person, that they can be like, oh yes, I've helped this person, or just like trying to exploit your story for their own benefit, it makes people clamp. And it's like, I don't want to talk to you, because in many situations, I feel like in more situations than not, you kind of feel threatened by people who are approaching you like that. You don't want, or in general, if you're being approached to tell your story that's sensitive, you feel threatened. Like you put your guard up. And I feel like approaching people in the most human way possible, just have a conversation with them. Don't be like, oh, let me ask you this 1,000,001 questions. Just like talk to people, because they're people. And I feel like that's important.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Like Kevin was saying, volunteering at, the Boys and Girls Club and local food pantries, and get to know them, like Asia was saying, not because they're poor, but just get to know them as someone in your community and build a relationship with them and see what they want and what they need, not what you think they need or should want, but hear what they have to say.
The panel that preceded us, this panel here, I like what they had to say. I like that language demonstration on the monitor. That was very powerful. And I agree with Asia and Callie. I try not to be a savior. When I go into the community, I want to raise everyone's consciousness. I try to make everyone that I come into contact with aware of resources and help, so they can hopefully become like me, or help them, not just help others, but help themselves. But I try not to be a savior. I want everyone to be autonomous and self-sufficient.
So much of our work is really about educating, our communities and educating our lawmakers, and being on the defense, particularly right now. I mean, I feel very much on the defense. We are fighting some serious threats, but to echo what Joanne said earlier, we have to keep our eye on what's possible. Like, what is the vision for what our future is? What is the society that we want to live in? So thinking more proactively, what would you like to see? What do you want to see in the world? What do you want to see our country do to protect your children and grandchildren and generations to come? So think a little bit more proactively.
I'm always the one to reach for it. Sorry. I feel like my vision of the country I'd want to live in, not saying it's not this one, but for this country, is just to live in a society where everyone's health, everyone's access to food was all looked at equally, and just like not, I'm rich so I can buy food and who cares if you can't. I feel like I want to live in a society where I care about my health and my belly as much as I care about this person and this person. So I feel like that's what I want to see.
I would say that I would like every mother to have the experience that I had. Now that Sebastian has been in therapy for over a year and starting out where he maybe said mom and dog, now has full conversations with me, says his ABCs and counts, for everyone to have access to those programs, for everyone to be able to feed their child at night and to receive assistance without having the stigma attached to it.
In answering that question, I don't readily have an answer. The first thing that came to my mind was the state of the United States and the state of the race in this country. I believe that race has a lot to do with a lot of things that are going on, that are happening, and why some people don't have this and don't have that. I feel that until this country steps up, the leaders of this country, the people of this country, address the issue of race, a lot is not going to get done.
Okay, well, let's all hang on to those visions of the world, because I think that's really important.